Kalimera, bonjour, good morning. Your Excellencies, thank you for being here today with the friends and the family of the International Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to request the President of the Greek National Committee, Petros Doukas, Mayor of the city of Sparta, to take the floor.
Your Excellency, former Prime Minister Lucas Papadimos, dear friends, dear Paul, Chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce based in Paris, Your Excellencies, dear ambassadors, dear ICC presidents who have honored us with your presence from Mexico to Belgium and from Cyprus to Pakistan, we're very honored to have you here. Let me first thank Nico Vernico, our former chairman of ICC Greece, for really pulling through today's beautiful event. His work and attention to every detail is quite magnificent. And Philip Ioannou, our ICC manager, for his long hours and hard work. Many thanks to all the members of our board of directors for their support. And Christina Vallena, president of Zapio, for her full support and for co-hosting this event and co-organizing this event here with us today. And Achilles Chaltas and the Athens Democracy Forum team, and Antigoni Zorba and the Simeon Tsomokos team for their excellent work. And many thanks to the National Bank of Greece for their generous support. It's very much appreciated. Well done. Dear friends, we are very excited to host here in beautiful Athens the 100-year celebrations from the creation of the International Chamber of Commerce. Where you're working now, all over this place, giants have walked. Theseus, Solon, Miltiades, Themistocles, Aristides, Cimon, Pericles, Phidias the sculptor, Anaxagoras the philosopher, Thucydides, the greatest historian of all time, Socrates, Plato, Isocrates, one of the world's first and foremost political scientists, Demosthenes, Xenophanes, who said, if horses had a god and they could paint, they would paint their god as a horse. What an inspiration to feel all of them around us. They are the fathers of the Western civilization. And based on their thinking, Western societies and humanity has been moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, the world has enjoyed virtually 75 years of uninterrupted peace and prosperity. Yes, there have been many conflicts, but they were local in nature. And based on this relative calm, humanity has been moving forward and connecting faster and more efficiently. More and better airplanes, faster trains, more and bigger bridges, 5G connections with much greater speeds, artificial intelligence, Facebook, Instagram, connecting of billions of people around the world. And as we connect through the internet, data mining companies analyze the way we use the web and know more about us and our behavior than any of the top psychologists and psychiatrists. Orwell's 1984 Big Brother is already here. But at the same time, as we progress, we are steadily destroying our environment. We at ICC Greece and our ICC Energy and Environmental Cluster are very strong proponents of planting billions of trees around the globe and in Greece of whatever variety science suggests. And at the same time, income inequalities are becoming bigger and bigger with an eroding middle class. The wealthiest 1% on this planet owns 47% of the world's wealth, 1% for 47%. As Aristotle wrote in his Politics, you need a very strong middle class to stabilize the system that is torn by the conflicts between the very rich and the very poor. And you need a strong middle class to worry and take action to save our planet. but we don't have a strong middle class. Aristotle also wrote something else, that people cannot bear their good fortune for very long. They will do something to screw things up. About 3 weeks ago, the World Trade Organization concluded that the USA may impose up to $10 billion in tariffs against the European Union as a final result of the 15-year dispute between Airbus and Boeing. For the first time, an organization that promotes freer trade sanctions the importation and the imposition of tariffs. Prime Minister Boris Johnson insists on a full Brexit, even with a customs border in Northern Ireland. And President Trump proclaimed that his priority is patriotism, not globalization. Sounds reasonable? To very many, of course it does sound reasonable. Who does not feel very strongly about his country's interests? Yes, but in the end, all of us patriots will be trying to grab a bigger share of a much shrinking pie. Human ingenuity needs space. Any innovation, any business, every business needs customers. Every business needs bigger markets. The smaller the markets, the fewer the customers. The poorer the business, the poorer the exchange of ideas and the exchange of knowledge. This is what ICC has been proclaiming for 100 years now. Let humanity prosper from more international transactions. Our ICC Paris headquarters and 90 ICC national committees all over the world, and the World Chambers Federation and numerous ICC committees of experts stand ready to support every business's international ambitions. And ICC in Greece has been doing a lot of work to connect businesses. We have mobilized our teams on arbitration, on energy and climate change, on intellectual property. And our ICC Greece Businesswomen Initiative is emerging rapidly and developing into Greece's preeminent and top women's organization. Please join ICC and help Greece and the world become a better place for our kids to live and to work and to raise their families. Ladies and gentlemen, creativity, growth, and expansion is in our human DNA. Let's not keep it stranded in our grandfather's little villages. And how does Greece fit in what I just described? We're an island of stability. We have a new government that favors businesses and innovation. We have a number of sectors worth looking to. Food and agribusiness, tourism, real estate, shipping. Some of the top shipping managerial talent in the world is just around this very building. Logistics, insurance, engineering, and software talent, just to name a few. Dear Prime Minister, dear Paul, dear friends and members and guests of the ICC world family, we are very proud and very happy to have you here with us today and hope you will all have a great time. And may I remind you, as the mayor of the city of Sparta, that next year, 2020, Greece and Sparta and the free world will be celebrating the 25 years from the famous naval battle of Salamis and the Battle of Thermopylae, and commemorating the valor and sacrifice of King Leonidas of Sparta, the 300 and the 700 Thespians who fought for freedom and democracy. As mayor of the city of Sparta, let me also extend to you an invitation to visit us anytime you can. We are really proud to have you here today. Thank you and enjoy. Nikos.
Thank you, Petros. The politicians who are in our program are working hard because these days we are completing the first 100 days of this government to implement what they have promised to the Greek people. So we pardon the minister if he's going to be late, and all those who participate in the next door parliament, and we thank them for what they have done in these first 100 days. So, Paul, it's now your turn as President of the International Chamber of Commerce to address our family.
Thanks, Nikos, for the opportunity, and good afternoon, everybody. Or as you all say, Kalispera. I was trying to download some of my talk on my iPad, but I can't get it downloaded, so here I am. Exposed as can be, but happy as ever. Nothing better than speaking your mind versus a prepared text. But first I want to thank you. First I want to thank Nikos, obviously, and Petros for their enormous hospitality and having us here and actually putting this event together. And Petros being now the chair or the mayor of Sparta is quite an achievement, and obviously he should be congratulated. I spent a lot of time in the US, but I can tell you that Sparta is more known in the US than Athens. Don't get offended by that, but you know, the city that he leads can have an enormous influence if used as a force for good. I'm here to represent the ICC in one of my capacities. I'm the chairman of the ICC. It's about 45 million companies worldwide. 1 in 3 employees would actually fall under the ICC. We're in about 90 countries. And the ICC was actually created, hence the 100-year celebration. The ICC was created in 1919, which came just after World War I. It was a horrible period. And people came together and said, this is not what we want to repeat. And one of the best ways to avoid history repeating itself is to make countries more interdependent and start to trade with each other. So the first arguments were made that an interdependent, open global trading system is actually better. And as a result, the people of the ICC were called in those days the merchants of peace. Unfortunately, we got the Second World War and had to work on some other things still to put a lot of these institutions in place. One of them being the World Trade Organization, which is actually a forerunner of the World Trade Organization, which was actually put together at that time by the ICC. So anyway, I want to congratulate you on your 100-year or nearly 100-year existence, because the Greek chamber, as you would expect, is one of the oldest chambers that we have around. Now, I can talk about the ICC and global trade and all the other things, but Petros already talked about that. And frankly, they're the least important ones on my mind right now. We know we have a very tense situation globally, but I think we need to go to a little bit deeper than just talk about the global trade. So I wanted to start my talk with a little bit of a positive note. And that is really that going back to the book of Charles Dickens, which he wrote in 1859, The Tale of Two Cities. In that book he was talking about it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And I think it really reflects what we are facing right now. There's no question that we have done very well to lift enormous amounts of people out of poverty. In fact, in the last 50 years, we've grown the global economy 9-fold, population 3-fold. So per output, we've all become 3 times wealthier. The Millennial Development Goals that started in the year 2000, which had a simple objective to halve the number of people in poverty over a 15-year period, we actually achieved that. There are more people in education now than any time in human history. More people having access to health care than in any time in human history. People actually living longer. Maternal care is better. More people having access to clean drinking water or housing than at any time in human history. In fact, every day in this world, 250,000 people get lifted out of poverty, and 270,000 people are getting access to clean drinking water or sanitation. Not surprisingly, a former American president, which I like to quote more than the current one, said actually that it's actually the best time to be born. And I believe that. For anybody that is born now, it's an exciting time to deal with the challenges. We also don't have to talk about the young generation as giving them enormous issues and we not doing our jobs. They're really ready to embrace these challenges and find solutions. That's the best of times. The worst of times is obviously that we've discovered that our economic system that provides that growth is probably not sustainable. And if we don't bend it, and if we don't try to change it, to make it more inclusive, more sustainable, we're actually probably ending up in a significantly worse place than we would, and with dire consequences around some of the areas I'll be talking about. So I will be simply arguing not for or against capitalism, but I will be arguing that it is time for us to bend the curve of capitalism and to adjust it to the needs of today's society. The crisis in 2007-2008, which is now more than 10 years ago, some people called it a financial crisis, and that's how it started, Lehman Brothers and all these things. By the way, it was a relatively low amount. That crisis started with $250 billion of unserved debt, and we're still recovering from that. Then it became an economic crisis, and some of you might argue it actually became, in many countries, a political crisis. I would say that at the end of the day, it was a crisis of morality, because the way that we grew the economic system until then, and not surprisingly, when everything goes well, nobody asks themselves questions, but the way we grew the economic system until then came at an enormous cost, enormous levels of private or public debt, enormous pressures on the scarce resources of this world in the way our consumption pattern works, and frankly in a way that we left too many people behind. And in any system where too many people are left behind, or people feel that they're not participating, its system will ultimately rebel against itself. And it is that rebellion that you see right now in the polls, in the US or in the UK, obviously more prevalent, but you saw the same here in Greece and in many other countries around the world. You see it with people going into the streets with the yellow jackets or the extinction rebellions or in many other places in the world. Any system where people don't feel they're fully participating or are actually excluded, I would argue, will ultimately rebel against itself. The two biggest challenges that we have, that we need to keep smack in front of us, if we like it or not, are climate change and inequality. And Petros already alluded to that. Now, these challenges happen to be the two sides of the same coin. Climate change is a very burning issue, is a very urgent issue that needs to be addressed with far more vigor than is currently happening. The signs are all around us, if we believe it or not. I think most of us understand that we have a problem when 18 of the last 20 years are the hottest in human history, when we have 450 particles, which are higher than any time in human history now of CO2 in the air, when we're losing 1 million species as we talk here as a result of these changing weather patterns, we really have a problem. And I don't think people are fully aware of the issues that we have. Right now it's 1.1 degrees that we're dealing with on a trajectory to 1.5 degrees. We could stop at 1.5 degrees if we decided to. Anything above that has, by any common sense and work of many scientists, disastrous effects. In fact, it would be uninsurable what we have to deal with on anything above 2.5 or 3 degrees, and that's the trajectory that we're currently on. I don't think that people fully understand the scale of the decarbonization that needs to happen in the global economy. If you want to stay below 2 degrees over the next 20 years, we would have to cut the absolute carbon emission by about 40%. But over the 20 years, our economy is going to grow. So if your economy grows 2 to 3%, it basically doubles over that period, which means that per economic unit of output, we will have to cut by 80%. There is not one country in the world that's even close to thinking that or doing that. And that's obviously where the problem is. The problem actually shows up most amongst the poor people in the world. 75% of the effects of climate change are actually borne by people that don't have the resilience to deal with it. To some extent, we are living, despite the challenges that you might think we have in Western Europe and the US, we're living sort of in a bubble, protected from the realities of it. But 75% of the world's people in the emerging markets are obviously the ones most affected. 750 million living close to the coastal lines are even more affected. Their houses are less resilient, their food supply chains are less resilient, and obviously what we are seeing right now is the beginning of an increased number of people being pushed into poverty as a result of climate change. The fact that we have 126 million refugees now roaming around the world, and these numbers are going up, is a direct result of this, for example. The second area that Petros referred to is inequality. A system that only works for few and not for many is not a good system that will last. In the crisis of 2007, 2008, it was very clear to many people in this world that the banks were too big to fail, and obviously it was probably a right decision to rescue them, and Greece to some extent has also benefited from some of that. But people also felt that they clearly were too small to matter. Many of the people have not seen their incomes go up over the last 20, 30 years in many countries. Middle class is being eroded, which is a major risk to democracy. And with cost of housing or healthcare or education continuing to rise, the reality is that most people in this world have actually seen their actual spending power decrease. And that causes a lot of angst. That angst is fertile ground for populists, that angst is fertile ground for nationalism, and that is currently playing itself out at the political level, increasingly shrinking back to their own territories, increasingly driven by short-term populist policies. Nobody would benefit from that. In terms of income inequality, Petros mentioned a few statistics, but last year, I just want to remind everybody, was actually the first year in the human history that the bottom 3.8 billion people in this world, the poorest people in this world, actually saw their incomes go down by 11% combined. It's never happened before. The poorest people down 11%, whilst the billionaires in this world saw their combined income go up by 12%. Just the income increase of the billionaires last year was $900 billion. So if you just take a 0.5% tax, or you take the $900 billion, you can put the 246 million children that are currently not in school into education. You can probably provide health care for about 5 million children that otherwise die prematurely. Now you might say, I don't want to spend that money that way. But then look at how that money is currently spent. Half the world's money, lots of that sitting in that very small percentage of people that hold the wealth in this world right now, is earning 0 or negative interest rates. You cannot argue to me, even as a businessman, that 0 or negative interest rates are better than keeping people out of education or not giving them a chance to make it past the age of 5. Now we have a plan, a very good plan, that got signed by 193 countries in the UN in September 2015, which is called the Sustainable Development Goals. A simple plan to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. A plan over the next 15 years that deals obviously with poverty alleviation, but 16 other goals, reaching from food security or gender inclusion to sanitation, education, or peace and justice, protecting the life on lands or oceans, and the last goal, number 17, one of partnership. Recognizing that if we want to solve these tremendous human challenges that we face, we actually need to have a different form of cooperation than we currently do it. Einstein said it very well when he said the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That is not going to work. If we want to solve the challenges of this world and create a more prosperous, inclusive future for all of us, which I think we are all well served to do, it requires us to work at a different level than we do currently. The Sustainable Development Goals are an enormous business opportunity at a time that many countries struggle in terms of creating employment, in terms of making it a more inclusive growth, in terms of getting their economies to grow at all. We are being handed a framework, a moral framework, I may say, that is probably the biggest opportunity that we have. We created a commission called the Commission on Business and Sustainable Development to take that complexity of these Sustainable Development Goals and put it into some simplicity of what it means for business. And just looking at energy transition, cities, health and well-being, and food and agriculture, those 4 areas, we found an opportunity of about $12 trillion and an opportunity to create 85 million more jobs. Any of the goals I've looked at and any of the plans I've been involved in, I've come to the conclusion that they are probably bigger opportunities for businesses than having to deal with the cost of not acting. Now, normally we rely on governments to do the job for us. And you could argue governments have done a decent job until now, but as we talked, the situation is becoming a little bit more difficult. The main reason for that is that most of these institutions that we put in place to deal with these increasing global issues, cybersecurity, financial markets, climate change, these institutions that we put in place date from the time of Bretton Woods, which was 1944. Unfortunately, at that time, 80% of the world's economy, 85% of the world's economy was located in Europe and the US. The world has moved on, but our global way of governance hasn't been adjusted. Anybody who runs a company probably has had 15, 20, 25 business plans to stay active, to stay relevant over that time period. And unfortunately, our global governance system hasn't done that. That's the reality, and frankly, it's very difficult to see the solutions of that in the near term. That is why I argue that business actually needs to step up and take that responsibility, or if you want to, fill that void. It doesn't serve anything to blame the world's politicians. You have to be a courageous person nowadays to be in politics. But we, as business people, have to de-risk this political process and have to help bring more courage again back to the governments to do the right long-term things. It's very important for business to do that, because business cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place, nor can businesses really prosper in societies that fail. These economic crises, the fact that we have many countries that stay at a sub-performance level, is coming at a high cost to business as well. So business has a direct interest in doing that. The Sustainable Development Goals require a spending every year of $3 to $5 trillion. That might sound like a lot of money, but it is about 3 to 5% of the global economy. By all means, we have that money available, and as I mentioned, a lot of sitting dormant in banks earning 0 or negative interest rates. So turning that money into productive money is probably one of the biggest investment opportunities that anybody should get excited about. The governments of this world clearly don't have that money. The combined amount of overseas development aid that all governments have together is only about $160 billion, so far short of the $3 to $5 trillion that is needed, and that is why we need to unlock the private sector money, and that is why we need to get the private sector fully behind these Sustainable Development Goals. Interestingly, for each of these 17 goals, I would argue, we have already costs, or we are incurring costs already today that are higher than the implementation of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is the bizarre thing. Why are we willing to incur such enormous costs and the consequences of that, risking our own future and frankly the future of humanity, whilst we have solutions that actually are significantly cheaper? Now, you might not agree with me, but the cost that we currently have in conflict prevention and wars, goal number 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals deals with peace and justice. The cost that we have currently on conflict prevention and wars is 10 to 12% of the global economy, and the numbers are going up. It's actually 3 times more than what it cost us to implement the total Sustainable Development Goals. On climate change, which is goal 13, called climate action, the cost that we are currently incurring because of our inattitude to do something about it is $5.3 trillion a year. Natural disasters, changing food patterns, disruptions to our economic systems. And the numbers are going up quite quickly. That cost alone is more than the implementation of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So my argument is for business to embrace these Sustainable Development Goals, to internalize them into their business models. It starts with trying to understand the issue that is out there, then figuring out that you can do something about it, but more importantly, internalizing them is probably your biggest business opportunity. The businesses that do that will do very well. McKinsey just calculated that businesses that built in the effects of climate change into their thinking and their strategies, businesses that are run with a more diverse workforce and have gender balance, they also tend to be giving us better financial results. Impact investing now is about $30 trillion. And frankly, the returns are increasingly proven to be higher. $30 trillion now of money under management is already focused on what you call ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance, and these numbers are going up rapidly. Now, I would argue that we have all the answers to solve today's problems. We know how to produce food without cutting down the forests of this world. We know how to build houses so that people don't have to be homeless. We know how to build toilets, yet so many people still are deprived from the issues and having to deal with open defecation. We know how to provide a simple piece of bar soap to children, yet 4 million children still die every year before the age of 5. So it's not really technology that is missing. Sure, it will help. It will help to have carbon capture or battery storage capacity and many other things. But we do have all the answers today. We don't need to send more people to Mars or Pluto to find the answers. We frankly also don't need more PhDs. We need human willpower. And human willpower itself is a renewable resource. It boils down at the end of the day, to put it simple, to the leadership. And the simple question of, do we care? Leadership, first and foremost, is about being human beings, and secondly, about putting the interest of others ahead of your own, knowing that by doing so, you're better off yourselves as well. Unfortunately, in many places in the world, we've come to measure self-worth by net worth. But what if we would measure self-worth by our ability to invest in others and in future generations? Some people think greed is good, but ultimately generosity will win, and that has proven itself to be the case over and over again. We need leaders with a higher sense of purpose, leaders that can think intergenerational, leaders that can understand the complexities of today's world, because it isn't easy. Systemic thinkers who boil down that complexity and drive it into simplicity and action. But above all, leaders that put the interest of others ahead of their own, knowing by doing so, they'll be better off themselves as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that Adam Smith wrote his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiment, 17 years before he wrote his book, The Wealth of Nations. You cannot create wealth if you don't have that morality. And unfortunately, it's that morality that we have lost. Wangari Maathai, who unfortunately passed on and was an environmentalist in Kenya, said it very well when she said that there comes a time in history when humanity is called upon to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground. And I hope that you agree with me that that time is actually now. The reason that we are here is because we're fortunate. We're fortunate because we are financially independent. We belong to a part of the world that never had to deal with food security. We probably got free education from our governments, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here. We didn't have to worry about making it past the age of 5. Well, I have good news for all of us. If you fall in that category, you actually have won the lottery ticket of life. But you didn't do anything for it. You didn't do anything for it. You're just darn lucky. So if you have won the lottery ticket of life, you actually belong to about 2% of the world population now. And if you belong to 2% of the world population, it is your duty to put yourselves to the service of the other 98%. It's as simple as that. The Dalai Lama said that if you seek enlightenment simply to enhance yourself and your position, you miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment for yourself to enable you to help others reach their position, you are with purpose. My simple message to you is live a life with purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I thank both the Minister of Development and the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for their presence, and I invite Mr. Georgiadis, the Minister of Development and Investments, to take the floor.
First of all, thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored being here. And yes, it's a wonderful time to be born now. I agree. And I would add, it's a wonderful time to be born now and live in Greece. And this negative interest rate, I can understand the moral hazard, it was heard before, but for us, the news that today Greece, for the first time in our history, Mr. Ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Papadimos, we had negative interest rates. It's a fantastic news because this country proves that we are exiting from a crisis that destroyed many people in this country and made many people to suffer in the last 10 years. And now we can be much more optimistic about a bright future that is coming. And the government, the Prime Minister, me personally, and all the members of the government, we work as hard as we can in order to make it happen. So, for official reason, you will permit me to address in the Greek language because this is the right thing to do in our country. But I want to say again, you are very welcome. This is a great forum. We are happy that this is happening in Greece, that we participate, and we think that it's a very good chance to say things together, to try to realize what is the world we live in, what is going to happen, and of course discuss about global problems that at the end refers to all human beings. Κυρίες και κύριοι, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Η κυβέρνησή μας, όπως οι περισσότεροι από εσάς εδώ γνωρίζετε, αν και βρίσκεται στην εξουσία μόλις για 3 μήνες, έχει ήδη παρουσιάσει πολυσχηδές έργο και στα θέματα που αφορούν εδώ το συνέδριό σας, όχι μόνο το σημερινό, αλλά τα 100 χρόνια τα οποία έχει κλείσει τη δραστηριότητά του ο Διεθνής Οργανισμός για το Εμπόριο, νομίζω ότι αυτά που κάνει η κυβέρνηση της Ελλάδος σήμερα, η κυβέρνηση του Κυριάκου Μητσοτάκη, σίγουρα σας αφορούν και σίγουρα σας προκαλούν το ενδιαφέρον. Κυρίως διότι, και να πω εδώ ότι μαζί με τον συνάδελφό μου, τον κύριο Φραγκογιάννη, τον Υφυπουργό Εξωτερικών και υπεύθυνο για την εξωστρέφεια, με τον οποίο έχω μια πολύ στενή συνεργασία πάνω ακριβώς σε αυτούς τους τομείς και ιδιαίτερα τον ευχαριστώ για την καλή αυτή συνεργασία, προσπαθούμε να αλλάξουμε την προς τα έξω εικόνα της Ελλάδος. Να αλλάξουμε δηλαδή αυτό που γενικώς ονομάζεται με τη λέξη κοινή αντίληψη, perception στα αγγλικά, για το τι ακριβώς είναι η Ελλάδα. Η Ελλάδα, κυρίες και κύριοι, για πάρα πολλές δεκαετίες ήταν μια χώρα στην οποία αν κάποιος σκεφτόταν ότι θα έρθει να επενδύσει, θα άκουγε πάρα πολλούς φίλους, άλλους επενδυτές, νομικούς συμβούλους, μετόχους, οι οποίοι θα του έλεγαν πού πας να μπλέξεις, εκεί η γραφειοκρατία είναι ανίκητη, το σύστημα της δικαιοσύνης πάρα πολύ αργό, οι κυβερνήσεις αλλάζουν γρήγορα άποψη και εσύ βρίσκεσαι στο κενό και διάφορα άλλα προβλήματα, τα οποία σας διαβεβαιώ ότι για την Ελλάδα του παρόντος, γι' αυτό είπα στην αρχή, είναι πολύ ωραίο να γεννηθεί τώρα και να γεννηθεί στην Ελλάδα, είναι σίγουρα παρελθόν. Έχουμε μια κυβέρνηση σταθερή, εκλογές στη χώρα θα γίνουν ξανά το 2023, άρα έχουμε 4 χρόνια απολύτως προβλέψιμου πολιτικού περιβάλλοντος, μια κυβέρνηση εξαιρετικά φιλική ως προς το επιχειρήν και ως προς το εμπόριο και ως προς την ελεύθερη ανταλλαγή προϊόντων και επιχειρηματικών ιδεών, μια κυβέρνηση η οποία ήδη με το νομοσχέδιό μου που ήδη κατέθηκε σήμερα στη Βουλή προλίγου και ξεκινάει η κοινοβουλευτική του συζήτηση την Παρασκευή, εξαφανίζει το 70% περίπου της παραδοσιακής ελληνικής γραφειοκρατίας ως προς την δημιουργία μιας επιχείρησης και βεβαίως προχωρούμε σε όλα τα μεγάλα επενδυτικά σχέδια τα οποία υπήρχαν στο παρελθόν κολλημένα στα συρτάρια επί δεκαετίες. Η μείωση των φόρων, για την οποία έχω δεσμευτεί και προσωπικά στην ημέρα φορολογικής ελευθερίας που παρουσιάζουμε κάθε χρόνο στο ΚΕΦΙΜ, έχει ήδη ξεκινήσει και θα γίνει και πολύ πιο έντονη τον επόμενο χρόνο. Ο προϋπολογισμός που κατατέθηκε προβλέπει μείωση του φόρου των επιχειρήσεων από το 28% στο 24%, μείωση του φόρου στα μερίσματα από το 10% στο 5%, περαιτέρω μείωση του ένφια κατά 10% του φόρου στα ακίνητα, Έχουμε ανακοινώσει μείωση στις ασφαλιστικές εισφορές από τον Ιούλιο του 2020 κατά 5% και αυτή είναι μόνο η αρχή, διότι όσο αυξάνουμε τους ρυθμούς ανάπτυξης της χώρας και όσο υπάρχει υπέρβαση των στόχων του προπολογισμού, όλο το πλεόνασμα που δημιουργείται θα κατευθύνεται σε ταχύτερη μείωση των φόρων των ασφαλιστικών εισφορών. Έτσι ώστε η Ελλάδα να γίνει όσο γίνεται γρηγορότερα, περισσότερο ανταγωνιστική και να μπορεί να αξιοποιήσει το εξαιρετικό ανθρώπινο δυναμικό που έχει με τέτοιο τρόπο ώστε να παράγουμε υγιείς, καλοπληρωμένες και με προοπτική θέσεις εργασίας που θα επιτρέψουν πρώτον στα παιδιά μας να μην συνεχίσουν να φεύγουν όπως έφυγαν τα πρόσφατα χρόνια, στα παιδιά που έφυγαν να αρχίσουν να επιστρέφουν, και αυτό είναι ένα πολύ μεγάλο στοίχημα της κοινωνίας μας, δεν το θα τα χάσουμε, να δώσουμε κίνητρα για να κάνει ακόμα παιδιά και να αντιστραφεί ο δημογραφικός μας δείκτης, ο οποίος δυστυχώς είναι εξαιρετικά αρνητικός, όπως και στην υπόλοιπη Ευρώπη βέβαια. Για το δημογραφικό, κάνω μια μικρή παρένθεση, δεν είναι πρόβλημα μόνο της Ελλάδος, είναι πρόβλημα συνολικά της Ευρώπης και ίσως της Δύσης, αν το βλέπαμε λίγο ευρύτερα, ίσως οι ΗΠΑ λίγο να ξεφεύγουν από αυτό, αλλά και είναι διαφορετικό το σύστημα. Άρα λοιπόν έχουμε πολλή δουλειά να κάνουμε, δεν αφήνουμε καμία μέρα να πάει χαμένη, εργαζόμαστε όσο μπορούμε περισσότερο και επαναλαμβάνω, οι ιδέες που στο δικό σας φόρουμ εξελίσσονται, υπάρχουν, ανταλλάσσονται και δρούν, μας είναι εξαιρετικά ευχάριστες. Είμαστε έτοιμοι να ανοίξουμε τα αυτιά μας και σε πράγματα που πιθανόν δεν έχουμε σκεφτεί, γι' αυτό και είναι πολύ καλό να γίνονται τέτοιου είδους φόρα στην Ελλάδα. Δεν ισχυριζόμαστε ότι κατέχουμε την απόλυτη γνώση, ισχυριζόμαστε ότι έχουμε τη διάθεση όμως να αλλάξουμε πράγματα, να κάνουμε μεταρρυθμίσεις όχι για τους ξένους, όχι για την Τρόικα, όχι για το IMF, όχι για το Σόιμπλε, αλλά για μας. Αυτό είναι που θέλουμε να κάνουμε, θα το κάνουμε, έχουμε ξεκινήσει να το κάνουμε και θα πάμε πάρα πολύ καλά. Ένα τελευταίο, μια και είμαστε ένα διεθνές φόρουμ εδώ και επειδή ακούστηκε προηγουμένως, δεν σημαίνει ότι επειδή επικεντρωνόμαστε στα δικά μας προβλήματα, εννοώ της Ελλάδος, ότι χάνουμε την ευρύτερη ματιά των παγκοσμίων προβλημάτων τα οποία όλοι αντιλαμβανόμαστε. Όπως στον τομέα της κλιματικής αλλαγής, η ελληνική κυβέρνηση διαστόματος του Πρωθυπουργού Κυριάκου Μητσοτάκη στον Οργανισμό Ηνωμένων Εθνών δεσμεύτηκε για την εξαιρετικά ταχύτερη των προηγούμενων στόχων απολιγνητοποίηση της αγοράς ενέργειας της Ελλάδος. Στόχος να κλείσουμε όλες τις λιγνητικές μονάδες μέχρι το 2028. Ο λιγνίτης, φαντάζομαι όλοι γνωρίζετε, είναι και η πιο βρώμικη μορφή ενέργειας από τις μορφές του άνθρακα. Άρα λοιπόν εδώ έχουμε ένα μεγάλο εθνικό στίχημα να το πετύχουμε. Έχουμε συγκριτικά πλεονεκτήματα και τις ανανεώσιμες πηγές ενέργειας, ενώ τον ήλιο και τον αέρα, αλλά και τις μονάδες φυσικού αερίου, οι οποίες με τις έρευνες για το φυσικό αέριο που ήδη προκηρύξαμε και τις συμβάσεις που ήδη υπογράψαμε και κυρώσαμε στη Βουλή με πολύ μεγάλες πετρελαϊκές εταιρείες του εξωτερικού, εάν τα πρώτα ευρήματα επιβεβαιωθούν, η Ελλάδα τα επόμενα χρόνια θα έχει και δικιά της σημαντική παραγωγή φυσικού αερίου που θα μπορεί να τοποθετεί τα δικά της εργοστάσια φυσικού αερίου παραγωγής ενεργείας και σε συνεργασία με τις ανανεώσιμες πηγές ενέργειας να παράγουμε ένα θετικό ενεργειακό αποτύπωμα και να προπορευτούμε των στόχων που βεβαίως δεν θα κρυθούν στην Ελλάδα, αλλά η Ελλάδα θα κάνει αυτό που της αναλογεί κατά τον καλύτερο τρόπο που μπορεί. Φυσικά, επειδή ακούστηκε προηγουμένως, δεν κλείνουμε τα μάτια στο παγκόσμιο φαινόμενο της μετανάστευσης, το οποίο είναι πραγματικό και μεγάλο, έχει την εθνική του διάσταση και τα προβλήματα που δημιουργεί ανεξέλεγκτη ροή μεταναστών στην ελληνική επικράτεια, αλλά έχει και τη διεθνή του διάσταση και πώς το σύνολό της Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και μάλλον ούτε καν μόνη της Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, το πρόβλημα είναι μεγαλύτερο από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, είναι στην πραγματικότητα παγκόσμιο, πώς μπορεί να αντιμετωπιστεί με τρόπο που να είναι βιώσιμο για τα κράτη που δέχονται αυτές τις ροές, αλλά και ανθρώπινο για τους ανθρώπους που αποφασίζουν να κάνουν αυτή τη μετακίνηση. Γιατί και τα δύο μας απασχολεί και θέλουμε να τα λύσουμε. Από την έννοια αυτή, λοιπόν, για άλλη μια φορά ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Εύχομαι καλή επιτυχία στο συνέδριο και σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε, κύριε Υπουργέ. So I thank once again the Minister of Development and Investments, and we are going now to the first panel session. Bonjour. With Maria Livanos-Kataoui as moderator. Maria, Miranda Xafa. Miranda, you are welcome on the panel. Maria Fernanda, and everybody has to see Alexander Fessas. Okay. Με ποια σειρά τους θέλεις?
Ladies and gentlemen, that was a really splendid opening, and I think we're all inspired by what was said. I'm waiting just for a little bit of calm here. So, ladies and gentlemen, this discussion, and this is going to be a discussion, not a lot of speeches. This discussion, thank you, Candace. This discussion, could I ask for a little silence, please, in the back of the room? Thank you. In courtesy to our distinguished panelists, thank you very much. So this discussion was entitled Shaping a Future for the Bretton Woods Institutions and the WTO. That looks like an extremely sleep-making title. Actually, it isn't. And I pick up a lot of the things that Paul Polman was discussing to say that this is really one of the biggest challenges that we have in front of us now. And the reason for it is that we're living in a new crisis of multilateralism, a real crisis of multilateralism. I would ask again if people in the back of the room would be so kind to either leave the room or to let this panel please proceed. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. I think I will have to stand up. Don't worry. Ladies and gentlemen, at the back of the room, would you kindly either be quiet or kindly leave the panel to see? Thank you. They take a long time to leave.
That was very effective.
It works.
Yes.
Excellent. I think we're now among ourselves, and we can go on. I'll ask one of the ladies or gentlemen at the back, please, to close the doors. That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, why is of any interest whatsoever that we address the question of the Bretton Woods institutions? Do you know what they are? They're the World Bank. They're the International Monetary Fund. They originally were the GATT, which has now, as you all know, become the World Trade Organization. And I think our contention among us here is that we're in the middle of a new multilateral crisis. And what that actually means is that we're wondering if these institutions are still relevant at their 75th anniversary. We're still worried about that at this moment. Multilateralism is at the core of ICC's competency. And you and I know, whatever nice things we say about ourselves, that there is a growing dislike and a mistrust of multilateral processes, commitments, institutions. And it's, Paul, I remember that you were you mentioned as you were saying about global governance. I would tell you that it's almost a taboo word today in many places to bring up the issue, even the words global governance. However, the good thing is, or an interesting thing, is that lots of regional players have emerged in development, in finance, and some of them are even closer to their constituencies. Just think of the international financial banks that are close in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. And what has also emerged is something that was mentioned before: huge global markets, huge businesses around that have even been more important for their local constituencies and for the world in development. So we have a lot of things that are going on, but that put into question our reliance or even our concept of those fantastic 75-year-old, less of them for the WTO, but part of it, of those institutions. And you and I know that in trade, actually the big thing today are bilateral, sometimes plurilateral, but more regional and bilateral trade agreements, which have unfortunately brought with them, interesting as they are, a rise in bullying tactics, and I'm afraid in nationalist rhetoric as well. Not much appetite, is there, for concluding any further rounds, particularly on agriculture. So we're going to go with some questions, and we're going to do this in the form of a discussion together. First of all, is the evolving and this competitive international landscape, is it a good thing? Is it a good thing that the Bretton Woods Institutes are not alone anymore, that there's lots of other things going on? Do they still have a mandate? Are they fit for purpose in a 21st century digital economy where trade in data is bigger than trade in goods? That's very recent and very astounding. And how about the critical requirements that have been mentioned before by Paul Pullman precisely on environmental sustainability? Are they up to the challenge to address these things? So I'd like to ask you about what needs to change, why are they still dominated by the post-West powers, and are we capable of handling that? Miranda, Dr. Shafa, as you all know, Xafa has been extremely knowledgeable, present, and important at the many institutions, including the IMF, and as a Greek economist with governments, previous governments, of course, and she's now at the heart of some of these issues. So, Miranda, what in your idea is the real challenge here, particularly on the trade issues, which is, I think, perhaps foremost in ICC's concern?
Well, these are big questions, and they've been around for a while. I guess the two world wars were cataclysmic events that triggered international cooperation in order to ensure peace and stability and prosperity. We are fortunate that these institutions were all created in the 40s. The IMF, the World Bank, the GATT, which later evolved into the WTO, and the United Nations, because today there would not be the spirit that is necessary to create these institutions. They are based on a spirit of cooperation among their members, and this cooperation is now lacking. There are various complaints that have to do with growing inequality, both within countries and between countries. On the trade side, there are complaints about not everybody playing by the rules. There are concerns about subsidies, as in the current dispute between Boeing and Airbus, intellectual property rights, competitive devaluations of currencies or depreciations of currencies. So there are many complaints. There is also the complaint that the WTO does not have an effective mechanism to mediate disputes.
And in fact, some of the tribunals are not complete yet either. Judges not named and so on. They've had even trouble with this.
That's correct. And the Airbus-Boeing dispute has been going on for about 15 years. It's not new.
A long time.
And finally, on the financial side, the developing countries, the emerging markets, are complaining that the liquidity created through quantitative easing by the major central banks, the Fed, the ECB, etc., trigger enormous capital flows to these countries and generate boom-bust cycles and they make them vulnerable to balance of payments crisis. So these are broadly the complaints. And as regards the IMF itself, its mandate remains the same as it was in 1944 when the organization was set up. It is to promote international monetary cooperation, promote the expansion of trade and GDP growth, economic growth, and avoid policies that destroy prosperity, like the trade wars and the competitive devaluations of the interwar period in the 30s that deepened the Great Depression. At the same time, the institution itself has to change. Its quota, the fund's quota, the money it has available to lend, was tripled in 2009, in March 2009, to 750 billion in the peak of the global financial crisis. And it also has set up some credit lines with individual member countries. It's called the new agreements to borrow. So in all, the fund has about $1 trillion lending capacity. It sounds like a lot of money, but think that Greece borrowed 30 billion in one go. That was the biggest loan that the fund had ever given to any country. And now Argentina got 57 billion, so it's almost twice the money that Greece got. So at the same time, the quotas and voting power of the fund need to be rebalanced because unlike the United Nations, it's not one country, one vote, but you have as many votes as the money you bring to the table. Now the Europeans, the EU countries, have nearly 30% of the total voting power. The US has 16.5. China only has 6.1, almost the same as Japan. And India has about 2.5. So obviously, the emerging markets are way underrepresented compared to their weight in the global economy.
But also, it's not just the... I wonder if we should still be calling emerging markets, given that some of the investment potential comes and is in some of these areas. I sometimes refer to this as a post-West necessity that their contributions be increased also as well, and their power be increased. I really think that what we're dealing with, Miranda, here, especially in the IMF and the World Bank, is a power structure problem, more than anything else.
Yeah.
And one final question to all of you. You talked about so they've had the same, shall we say, mandate for 75 years. Sometimes they've even been doing it in the same way for 75 years. But also they've been put under great pressure because I would say the mantra of the IMF on austerity, very much backed up in Europe, as we know, by the Constitution of Germany, has been a serious problem. That shall we say, that the fluidity and the flexibility to be able to handle today's crisis is not quite the same as it was, and really poses for them a question of their mandate, a question of what they're telling people to do. How do you feel about that?
Well, the mandate remains the same, but the world has changed. As you said, the capital movements now dwarf the reserves that any one country has, and even the lending capacity of the IMF. So, yeah, the quotas need to be increased. The US has been reluctant to do that because it might lose, because quotas will be rebalanced and China will gain more. And the US risks losing its veto power because you need the 85% majority for major decisions like increasing the quotas. So the US is now at 16.5. If quotas are rebalanced toward China, then the US might lose the veto power. But the fund has been gone into new areas, into wealth and income inequality, into gender inequality, and into climate change. So these are areas that are well beyond its traditional focus on macroeconomics. Yeah. but they are important to the membership, and they have important macro implications. So the plate has been broadened for the fund now.
I will be very, shall we say, a little impolite, perhaps, here. They talk a good story, but when the chips are down, I haven't seen them supporting these new areas. And in fact, that is troublesome in light of some of the things that have been said here already, and I think you will hear also at the Democracy Forum. I turn to Fernanda, because some of these are also embedded inside of the World Bank. The World Bank still has a focus on mega projects, on extractive industries. These are not environmentally sustainable projects. And Fernanda will tell you, I'm sure, that the capital markets have done perhaps even more. The markets of business that you're in, the global businesses like you have all over the world, are probably the ones that have done the most to bring down those figures on poverty. And I'd very much like, as a businesswoman around, just tell us where you are implanted, and what do you think about also a question you have brought up many times, which is the bringing up of businesses like yours, not small businesses, not just the large mega projects, but real business, job-generating, middle-level businesses, and women in the business.
Yes, thank you. Going back to your previous question, I truly believe that we need to change the stewardship of the organizations, because the world, as you mentioned, has definitely changed. Manufactured products, the goods, currently have a high content of technology. For instance, a car, 30% of a car, it goes into technology, and only 42% of it goes into actual manufacturing goods. And if we go to a telephone like an iPhone, they will have more than 60% of it being software than an actual product. So we really need to change the context, because the world has changed. And from the point of view of a medium enterprise, we really need to have access to funds to do research and development and innovation, because otherwise we will not be able to grow with the markets at the pace they are going, and to the road they are going to. The problem with most of the projects of the World Bank, for instance, in my country, in Mexico, is that they lack the transparency and the accountability needed to make sure that the funds are really directed to where they were supposed to be. So we really need to engage this organization more into fighting corruption, to assure that these projects really benefit the people and the businesses that are targeted. For small and medium enterprises, it is extremely important to be able to incorporate into the global value chain, to really work from a local standpoint. But without the resources for financing, we will not be able to take advantage of all of these jobs and opportunities that situations like the climate change will bring to business.
But do you think, Fernanda, that the World Bank should be doing more of that? Do you think that that's its mandate, or do you think it has to change its mandate to include that?
I think that it's not really under mandate, as well as incorporating the women into the global economy, which is also another challenge that we have currently today. But they should really look into that, because as I mentioned before, the situation is not the same as it was in 1945.
Well, if we really want those two things to happen, among other things, I say they talk a good story. You often see it in the meetings of the IMF and the World Bank that they have every year. You hear about it all the time. But when I look at the figures of actually where the money is invested, I don't see it. So I think would be a great part of ICC's future, if you wish, ideas of its future work, to make sure that those institutions, if they are going to survive, including other financial institutions, actually live up to what they say they're doing. The money isn't going there. So it would be good to make sure that it does go there at some time. Alex, you're the head of the ICC International Court of Arbitration. I know we're not here looking at arbitration issues, not even dispute resolution issues.
I'm not sure we aren't, though.
Maybe we are. But on the three Bretton Woods, the reason that ICC is even involved with them is because multilateral cooperation and institutions to actually implement multilateral cooperation were what ICC was founded on and what's the basis of its competency and credibility. Is this still true?
Thank you for the question. I think it's 100% true 100 years after the establishment of ICC. And perhaps to reflect on the points that the previous three M's have all contributed to this discussion. I think we're looking for the redefinition of purpose and an affirmation that the purpose may not have totally changed, but needs to be refocused within the Bretton Woods institutions and to bring them up to date. It's exactly as Paul said, that the world has changed around them, but they have not necessarily been updated to the present day. So the governance system does need to change. And I think we hear more and more today about inclusive growth than ever before. And it is an extremely pertinent chapter through which a reform of the Bretton Woods institutions needs to go through. And this is where I think the International Chamber of Commerce becomes the enabler. It is a forum to inquire, it is a forum to reflect, and it is a forum to enable. ICC, through its network, basically connects the higher level, which are, in my view at least, the Bretton Woods institutions, through Paris and through the whole network, all the way down to large corporates and to medium and small-sized companies. So this is basically what we're there for.
You're very positive.
I am.
On this.
I am.
I'm going to go and see if there's anyone who has some questions. Think about them, put your hand up so that I can acknowledge you and ask you. Look, in the meantime, when the Bretton Woods institutions were formed 75 years ago, there were only states as actors. There still is only states as actors inside of them. And yet the actual development of markets has not been in the hands of the Bretton Woods institutions or even some of their offspring. It's really been in the hands of businesses. It was just mentioned many times here. And also, a great deal of the criticism you're mentioning is not only in the hands of the business world that is perhaps more responsible for some of those flows and perhaps some of the problems as well, but also in the hands of civil society. And neither of those is anywhere near these institutions. So among the reforms has always been whose voices are being heard and where does the power lie. Perhaps we could take that up. Tariq. Introduce yourself anyway, Tariq, to everybody.
I'm the chairman of ICC in Pakistan, and I am a businessman also, entrepreneur, as they say. I just, on the Bretton Woods matter, before I came and I saw the session, I already had been working on this, but I did further investigating on YouTube, because they have a lot of articles on this. And one of the funny things I picked up on this is that, in essence, the Bretton Woods is no more for the developed world.
No more?
For the developed world. It's more for us, the developing world. Your concentration, it's the OECD, the post-war Marshall Plan, blah, blah, blah. It was all for resurrection of the European economy in the post-war period. The problem we are facing, and I'm trying to convince the regulators, and all of them, is that whereas our productivity is not as big as yours, that's reflected in the intellectual property payments that we make in our current account, because your productivity is more. The issue really is on the capital account. The problems happening is that, the land is the same, but the people have increased. So it's a fixed asset which is worth much more because, your populations have gone from 20 million to 200 million. And those are fixed assets. And every time we go to the international accounting firms and we tell them, and they are responsible as much as the Bretton Woods, okay, look, I don't want this, and you've had diminution of currencies going into thousands of percent, meaning a 2 rupee dollar is today $150. So how are you going to reflect this enhanced capital value, or rather the fixed asset value on your balance sheet? It's a very technical argument. They say, oh yes, please take it to capital reserve. But we don't want it in capital reserve because we'll be taxed. We want it in equity because the land is finite, and this is a principal argument. We want our equity enhanced so that we can borrow more safely, keeping control of our enterprises and finance it more easily in terms of private equity or whatever. But if you don't have any equity on the balance sheet, that means you're encouraging capital transfer out of the developed world. Now, who's going to explain this to them?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tariq. Does anyone else have any comment or question that they would like to make? So let's pick up a minute on population. Any of you have anything that, any reflection in this on the population relevant or in relationship to the drawing power or to, especially in the World Bank, to development issues? Anything here?
Well, there is the secular stagnation debate. And I mean, it means different things to different people, but one of the explanations that has been brought forward why the global economic growth has slowed is the population aging, that people of working age, the population is growing, but it's growing mainly among the retirees.
Yeah.
So that would be...
Actually, it's very interesting, Tariq, because in your country, it's one of the few where the 16 to 64 age bulge, which is the working population, is actually increasing. Most countries, including China, most of Asia, certainly Korea, most of Latin America, definitely all of Europe, it's not at all that picture. So it's a very interesting question. I would say, Tariq, that it's almost independent of what will happen, and your question, is there any reflection of them as an asset in the balance sheets? Go ahead, Tariq.
Individual holdings of 1.5 million.
I can't hear you.
We have holdings like 1.5 million acres. These are land banks.
Yes.
Okay? That's our capital. Now that's not being bought on the balance sheet because they don't have the vision to understand that.
Very good.
Okay? So these are ancestral and they are inherited. So why would they put them if they're going to be taxed? Because that's the capital.
It's a question that I cannot answer why they're not doing it, or
I'm giving you an example.
One of the things that, Tariq, that perhaps is very interesting for you is that the regional institutions that are now cropping up are taking into account much closer, happening in Latin America, it is happening in Asia, tremendously, and Africa as well, that the regional banks of development are taking much closer attention to what I would call being close to their constituencies and understanding much better such issues. This is really not the World Bank's strong point, nor the IMF. Exactly. That's the Asian Development Bank, the African and other institutions. Exactly. Yes, please.
Yeah, in Mexico, we have a few years ago a lot of talking about this population bonus that we will have because of all the young people that was reaching working age. And that was supposed to be a great thing for the country and for business and everybody. But the previous governments that we have did not realize that in order to take advantage of that bonus, we needed to educate them really educate them in order to approach their working site adequately. And we did not do that. So most of these population bonuses that were supposed to push forward Latin America are not really happening, and it's really becoming a huge problem because we have more people on the working force that are not prepared for the challenges that the labor today presents.
But it's even interesting in Mexico, among others, that the increase in the working age population has decreased, actually, in Mexico. It's decreased, and a lot of people say that we didn't take advantage when they were a major bulge, a major player, and would have been, as in China, the driver for much development. And if you don't take advantage of the 16 to 64 or 16 to 64 age group, when they're there and they're the majority, you'll have a problem. And they didn't always, in Mexico and other places, take advantage of them in terms of education and putting them into the workforce. So you're absolutely right, Fernanda, on that point. Anything else on population issues? Yes.
Just, I don't know if this really falls squarely within Bretton Woods institutional reform, but again, one of the things that comes out of the SGDs is that you can tackle part of that by being inclusive. And of course, inclusive is also being diverse geographically, which means refocusing on the local populations and on developing their skill sets there on the ground. And therefore funding that might become available for local development and the development of local skill set, I think, is ever more pertinent today as a priority than before. I speak as a Grecian who actually had to leave Greece for reasons similar to the financial constraints that have been encountered in Latin America and everywhere else. And I think that if the opportunity had presented itself to a few generations of my people and others around the world, probably this would have been done in a completely different way. So yes, I'm still an optimist, Maria, I have to say.
One needs to be an optimist. I asked at the beginning if we thought that it was a positive thing that there are competitors to the three Bretton Woods institutions. Those competitors are local development or financing works. Those competitors include business, of course, greatly so. Those competitors also include bilateral and plurilateral or groups of people doing trade arrangements, but no longer multilateral. There's nothing in the books to do any multilateral things. So I want to ask you all a question before we finish, a kind of a, how do you say, temperature gauging among ourselves too. First of all, do we think that the Bretton Woods institutions of the World Bank and the IMF, let's take those two first, really need some serious regard, change to bring in the voices of what I call the non-West founders of these things? Are they seriously lacking in that regard, or is it not their duty? Who thinks that that it is not their duty to have to worry about this? They should carry on getting money from whoever they can, including the traditional founders, and continue to disperse it. Is that enough? Does anyone feel here, and raise your hand, that they should be changing drastically the way in which they regard their own constituencies? Does anyone here feel that the word global governance is really, nobody is paying any attention to it? I feel that no one's paying any attention to it. How many of you would like anyone to pay attention to it, or is it much too difficult for us in this really rather fragmented, torn apart world to even spend time on the way, by the way, that the Sustainable Development Goals wanted us to pay attention to cooperative work and global governance issues? Do you think there's anyone think that we should be? There's some appetite still? Candace, you do? Anyone else feel we have an appetite to do it? Not much, huh? Not many of you I see, not really. And yet that's the basis of ICC's work, cooperation in achieving this. It's sad. We should be doing something about it. And I would suggest that, Paul, you're the one who brought it up, and at ICC we should not be afraid to think about perhaps more on the cooperation and the governance of that cooperation, which may not go through anymore the traditional means. So those are a few of our pleas, maybe, and I will leave it to all of you to... Yes, Tarek, more.
You see, you check the clearing unions.
Microphone.
As long as you have the single clearing of the dollar and the predominant currency based out of New York, but you don't have Asian Clearing Union, this gives a very profound influence to the Washington institutions, okay? You must understand that, because the clearing union, because Asia is a very big market, but its clearing is in New York. The Asian Clearing Union was discontinued. So none of our bankers, and you talk about local bankers and regional bankers, forget it. The compliance measures, money laundering measures, FATF measures, I mean, it's like everybody's handcuffed, okay, to do anything. So the problem is the reform at the central level, where the mother institutions or the post-war institutions as you are, and we are in the post-war order, still have to be reformed. There's no way out.
Well, I think that probably is the message that ICC and others need to bring to these institutions, first and foremost. Interestingly, despite the fact that we have a lot of trade disruptions, and you all know what's happening between China and the US right now, most of the world still trades on the basis of WTO rules. Most of the world still obeys those. So it's not all over, even if big multilateral trade agreements are probably not going to happen anymore. And the most important, by the way, to all of you, of course, is the one that was never finished in agriculture. And that was never done. So there's a lot of work, I think, for the future for all of us who are interested in ICC and in international trade. And go ahead, Alex, your views.
You're going to accuse me for the third time of being an optimist, but it's true, and the WTO is up there together with the IMF and the World Bank, at least in my book. And it has, its rules enable 95% of world trade today. Work done by the WTO has actually brought down the price of standard household goods to a tremendous amount. Now, of course, there's a crisis. So how do we enable reform in that regard? Again, I think that the ICC, and not only ICC, but definitely organizations like the ICC stand to accelerate that process. And if I'm not mistaken, kind of like looking at Paul as well, I think it's only a couple of hours ago that at the WTO forum in Geneva, we released a paper where we actually propose how that can happen, how the WTO rule book needs to change. There needs to be probably a little bit more of a shift towards transparency with regard to part of the trade negotiations that take place, and something that I hold closer to my heart because I'm a little bit of a tourist in this regard. Disputes. I mean, you're missing 2 judges currently on the appellate court. If you don't have them there in the next 2 months, the whole system is paralyzed. Now, there is an arbitration protocol in place that may help in the interim that has been struck, I think, by the US and Canada, but you will need to reform your dispute settlement system as well.
You need to take that one to Washington, I'm afraid. Yes. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Danae Bizantakou. I'm an entrepreneur in shipping and tourism, but I'm also European Young Leader and Young Global Leader for Greece in World Economic Forum. And what I would like to say is that I agree with what you said, but we have to empower people from shipping, tourism, and agriculture to participate in the dialogue with these international organizations. Because from my experience in World Economic Forum, of course I cannot say for ICC, is that we don't have these networks, these sectors speaking with these organizations. And one more thing is very important, to empower the small and medium entrepreneurs. In Greece, it's 97%. And all over the world, where many of us that were active, but we cannot be in these dialogues. Thank you very much, and for the interesting dialogue that we had. Thank you.
Could you pass your microphone back?
Thank you. My name is Manthos Mavromatis from ICC Cyprus. A comment on WTO rules. Trying to follow the Brexit saga, one realizes that if there is no deal, then UK's trade with the European Union will fall back on WTO rules. And nearly everybody considers that a disaster. Does that say something about WTO rules in general? Thank you.
Anyone else? I have something as provocative as that. So let's take a stab at that. Any of you interested? Okay, the first one, which I'm sure Fernanda is close to your heart, is business involvement in state institutions. Is there a way other than perhaps through another institution like ICC to be able to interact for business? Is that something that you would push stronger?
Well, definitely. When I started my company in 1986, it was the worst year to start a company because Mexico had an inflation rate of 167% that year. So that was the reason why I got involved into business institutions, because sometimes politicians lack the long-term view. They only interested on the next election, so it is very difficult for them to make investments in the long term. And right now we are watching it very closely with the climate change issues. They have been recommended by the G20, the OECD, to invest for considering the climate change issues, but they still, even though they commit themselves to include that in the budgeting process and in the frameworks, they are not doing because they don't have the interest in doing that. And I believe that the only way to push them into getting those solutions is from the civil society and the business organization, and we need to really corner them in order for them to take those decisions that are against their own interests.
Does anyone else, would you like to take that one up, Alex?
I know you still won't like it. I totally agree. And I think, but with like a small nuance, I think it will still be a political process and we shouldn't be shooting at it. What we should be doing is de-risking it. And I think this is basically where the input from business and civil society comes in.
Miranda. I'd like to ask you the last question. You who have dealt with intergovernmental institutions, like Brexit, is there any chance that the WTO will simply break down because it doesn't have any more its teeth, its dispute settlement, its judges, its panels are not fulfilled, so everybody will go off in their own way? Or do you think that it is not analogous, there will not be a Brexit saga, as you put it, a Brexit saga for the WTO, and it will continue still with the rules that most of the people in the world play on?
Well, I mean, indeed, things are not going well for the UK. The deadline is approaching at the end of this month, and there is no agreement that is acceptable by the EU. But I certainly don't believe that the WTO will break down because of that. I think what this gentleman was referring to is if there is no agreement, if we have a no-deal Brexit, then trade between the UK and the EU will be governed by
WTO rules.
WTO tariffs, which are much higher than what now prevails. So it's not, it's of course, it's a step backwards because a free trade area stops being that. And I think it will be to the detriment of the UK primarily if that happens. But I don't think that this endangers the WTO itself.
No. In fact, if anything, it is interesting, at least for all of us from the outside, it is very interesting to see that the actual fallback position is not utter chaos. It's the WTO rules still. So there is, if I could suggest to all of us, and perhaps close on this, there is a very strong reason why whatever multilateral institutions we have, even if they are flawed, even if we have to fight very hard to get them to reform, perhaps it's in our advantage to make sure not only that some of them survive, but more important, as perhaps you brought up also, Tarek, to encourage some of the local, closer to their constituencies, institutions. We don't have an appetite very much in the world of the Western part, the post-Western part, to really work on new multilateral institutions. But they are the ones in the end that can keep a steadiness and a stability. So I personally hope that the World Bank institution, the Bretton Woods institutions have the courage to reform, and that they've got at least another century ahead of them, perhaps, of life. Any of you disagree here?
Well, I would only bring one example. The Bank for International Settlements based in Switzerland. Do you know how it came about? It came about in order to monitor German reparations after the First World War. Today we don't have German reparations, but we still have the BIS. So it has found a new niche for it.
And one more thing, and I'm going to be optimistic like Alex here, and it's that it's not that we have unsolvable problems right now. I mean, the situation is very complicated, but it's that we have not been able to find the solutions. And that is why it's so important to bring women, which is 50% of the population of the world, into the table, because in between women and small and medium enterprises, we might find the solutions.
Mm-hmm. And this comes in a panel with 3 women and 1 guy, so it's actually quite good.
You're now in the minority here, yes, exactly. Listen, I would like you all to give a big round of thanks, please, to these panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
And on that optimistic note, I turn it back to you, Nico.
Thank you, Maria. And now, dear friends, we are coming to the most interesting part of today's event. It is the session, the part that we are going to give our Excellency Award, the Excellency Award of the International Chamber of Commerce in Greece, to my schoolmate, Professor Loukas Papadimas. So I invite our President, the Mayor of Sparta, Petros Doukas, to explain to all of you the reason we have decided to award Professor Papadimas with this award.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are all very proud, and I'm personally very proud and also very happy to honor His Excellency, former Prime Minister Loukas Papadimos. First of all, where does his family come from? They come from Desfina in Phokida. Loukas' family comes from Desfina. He graduated from Athens College, got his PhD in economics from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But before that, he earned a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT, which is the most preeminent school of engineering. He has taught economics at Columbia, at Harvard, and at the University of Athens. He has worked as a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. He has served as governor of the Bank of Greece and vice president of the European Central Bank under Claude Trichet. He has served as president of the Academy of Athens and as a prime minister of Greece at a most difficult and critical time. He was lucky to survive an assassination attempt, and that was because, thankfully, he rode the wrong car, which was not bulletproof. So he's here with us today. And dear Paul, dear Nico, and dear friends, we're honoring a very, very special Greek, a teacher, a scholar, a central banker, a leader of our country at a most critical time, His Excellency Loukas Papadimos. Dear Paul, please join me in presenting the award. May I also invite the members of the board of ICC who happen to be here to join us up on the stage for the photo. Yes. Just one photo.
First of all, let me thank Peter Dukas, the president of ICC Hellas, for his very generous introduction. He was very kind and very generous. And also Chairman Polman for presenting this award. Thank you very much. It is really an honor and a privilege to receive this award, especially on the centenary celebration of ICC. I want again to thank President Peter Dukas, Honorary President Nicholas Vernikos, and all the members of the committee who decided to honor me with this award at this pan-European meeting of the ICC. Let me also express my gratitude to my colleagues, current and former, in academia, in central banking and in government, for their contribution to our joint work and also for the support over the years. Each one of us depends on the exchange of the trade of ideas and in our joint investment in our effort to achieve shared objectives. Now, the centenary of ICC is a very special occasion indeed. It speaks for itself, the centenary, about the significance, the resilience, and the viability of this international organization. And actually, I'm not aware of any major international business organization that has celebrated its 100th anniversary. So, if I may say so, congratulations to ICC on its achievement so far, and my best wishes for sustained success in activities and in addressing the future challenges over the next 100 years. And there will be many future challenges. So on this occasion, let me very briefly make 3 points which reflect my experience, and I believe they are also pertinent to the agenda of this meeting, as well as to the future challenges faced, some of the future challenges that are faced by business and government. Now, the first point, which has also been addressed by previous speakers, concerns the serious threats to multilateralism from the ongoing tsunami of anti-globalization. In pursuing its various objectives to foster growth and prosperity in the world, the ICC has appropriately supported multilateralism as the institutional framework and the coordinating mechanism in order to attain its goals and resolve problems associated either with the ongoing transformation of the global economy or caused by serious shocks which affect its performance. Now, as we all know, in recent years, the terms multilateralism and globalization have shrunk and become four-letter words. Protectionism and nationalism have risen in many countries, and they are posing threats to global growth and prosperity. And the need to prevent these risks from materializing has become imperative and urgent. Now, there is no doubt that in the coming century, business will witness a profound transformation of the global economic landscape, which will be shaped by, among other things, the rebalancing of economic powers, as well as by further technological advances. I think this is certain. However, there is uncertainty concerning the consequences, concerning the implications of these changes for growth and social welfare across and within countries. They will crucially depend on the ability of business and governments to effectively address the challenges which stem from the rise of anti-globalization sentiment, as well as from potential future crises that will threaten international trade and investment, and hence global growth. So strengthening rather than weakening multilateral institutions is key to global stability and prosperity. And let me add here that my own experience as an official who was involved in addressing the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2009, my own experience provides convincing evidence that the IMF and the G20 Financial Stability Board played a crucial role and acted effectively together with the national authorities in overcoming the crisis. Now, my second point relates to the balance of benefits and potential adverse and undesirable side effects of global economic integration. The net benefits of free trade and more generally of economic globalization have been questioned in recent years. And although globalization has greatly helped to reduce absolute poverty worldwide, in several countries there has been a strong political backlash against free trade and economic globalization, largely because of rising inequality within nations. It has been argued by some that globalization in goods and labor markets have succeeded in, quote, in exporting prosperity abroad and importing unemployment at home. I believe such arguments are generally false, but they do contain, in some cases, elements of truth. Thus, it is essential to address the undesirable side effects of global economic integration within countries and prevent the advocates of protectionism from undermining the multilateral institutions and reversing the progress that has been achieved towards stronger and sustained growth in previous years. The ICC, and was mentioned earlier, appropriately emphasizes the importance of achieving inclusive growth and prosperity. But the key question is how to achieve this objective in an effective and in a timely manner. And I believe that an appropriate response to this question, first of all, is important in its own right, but it will also contribute to addressing the anti-globalization political views and public statement. And the right answer will require further careful analysis of the facts, as well as decisive action both by business and governments. Now, my third and last point is about the prospects of further economic integration and sustained growth in Europe, not only over the medium term, but also over the longer run. And at present, the economic outlook is highly uncertain. As a result, and because it depends on political decisions on the way forward, which depend on many factors, including rather unfavorable current economic conditions, geopolitical tensions, demographic trends, and migration flows. The message that I would like to convey, and that's my last message, is that in order to achieve sustained growth and prosperity in the European Union, hopefully including the great island northwest of the Channel, is essential to first complete a single market, which is still not quite complete. And second, and in parallel, to establish the appropriate institutions and the political framework for the creation of a genuine and a strong European Economic and Monetary Union. The business community will need to support the appropriate stance and encourage the implementation of the reforms and actions that are necessary for achieving these objectives and in a timely way. This issue, I believe, could be the focus of a future ICC meeting. And I think this is especially important because failure is not an option for Europe in the coming century. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this great honor, and best wishes to the ICC for continuing success in achieving its goals over the next 100 years. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Candace Johnson and Christina Yanopapa from the Ministry of Digital Governance will let us know what is happening in the space. And when we say space, we don't look upstairs, but from upstairs downstairs. Candace is in the Executive Board of the International Chamber of Commerce. She's a new member, and I thank you, Candace, for joining our family. Please.
Okay, just tell everybody that just left the room that they're going to miss the best part of today. Okay? So they still have time if they want to come. If you can put on my first slide, that would be great. It is such a pleasure to share this podium with Christina Janopapa. When she called me and said, Candace, I'm coming back to Greece. I said, Christina, and she's going to help Greece, really develop their space activities. I said, Christina, you have to meet Nikos Vernikos. I put them together, and the two of them are doing some amazing things in Greece. This is I want to talk about the use of space in enabling the next century. So, dear Mr. Prime Minister, we're already talking about the next century of global business while supporting the SDGs. And some of you may think that it's not possible to do good and to do business. Let me tell you, it is great. So, we are now in what I call the golden era of space. The world has never needed so much connectivity, so much interconnectivity, and so much interactivity. And now is the time to harness the power of space, which has inspired and enabled individuals around the world, and I'm doing something wrong. Okay, so Oh, oh, I was afraid that, can you not hear me? Okay. Oh, we can hear you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So and also, if I may, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm an individual, and I do believe that every single person can make a change, and that today we all have the personal responsibility to do so. And it doesn't really matter what tools we use, be it financial tools such as Bretton Woods, be it agriculture, be it tourism. The most important thing is that you make an impact. And so 62 years ago, the Sputnik, the first satellite, we are celebrating 62 years of space. And that little Sputnik, my dad was at the time in Paris, and he told me afterwards, he said, everybody said, well, what is that satellite, what is that Sputnik going to do? And from that day on, it has inspired people to do so many things. Now, of course, when I was in 1957, I was 5. So I didn't get a Sputnik like that. I got a Sputnik like the one in the middle of that picture, which looks like a flying saucer. And Santa Claus, if you can kind of see him, and I do believe in Santa Claus, was in that flying saucer. And so from 5 years old, I was convinced that space and that you could do wonderful things with satellites. And, I'm 66 now, so, 51 years later, I still believe that is the case. And I'm so happy that I have the chance, and that so many young people also have the chance to use space to make the world better. Now, my father started the first satellites in the United States for President Kennedy and President Johnson, and we grew up, I grew up, if you can imagine, with people like Werner von Braun and Vincent Cerf, but also with Doxiadis. So, my dad would talk to me about the megalopolises, not only on the Earth, but also in space, and he talked about information systems for the megalopolises, which I think is important for you Greeks to understand your amazing heritage in so many things. Now, first, I used space for 2 things: to do freedom of choice and universal access. And, when you're an entrepreneur, you don't know that nothing is impossible. Everything is possible. And so when I was 30 years old in 1983, my husband was the ambassador of Luxembourg to the United States, and Luxembourg was having a crisis, a financial crisis, a steel crisis, and a broadcasting crisis. And they were looking for a new pillar of activity, a new pillar of economy. And so I told the Prime Minister, Mr. Werner, one of the fathers of the Euro, such a great man. He was 70, I was 30. I said, Luxembourg could have a satellite system. And he said, well, Candace, we don't have any people who know how to do satellites. And I said, well, I do, and I could help you. And so he said, okay. Now, can you imagine a 70-year-old, prime minister telling this 30-year-old entrepreneur, yes, okay, you do this satellite. So in 1983, I envisaged a world without any barriers in Europe. Even though other people saw a line between the center of that picture, I didn't. And satellites don't, because they bring about barrierless possibilities. And so when Maria says, if I still believe in globalism, I do, because with satellites you can cover the globe. And so I said, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could bring via Astra freedom of choice for television viewing throughout all of Europe. Not Western Europe, not Eastern Europe, all of Europe. Now I have to tell you, not everybody liked this idea at all. And also, we were totally privately financed. We had one business angel who believed in us, Count Roland de Kergolay. He was a European. And he believed that with a satellite, a privately financed satellite, it was not even allowed to have private satellite dishes at this time, much alone private satellites. And by the way, none of the European manufacturers would actually even offer us a satellite. Is a problem? Okay, so we had to, but that did not stop us. And so the ICC, here we are, we're talking about privately financed, we're talking about businesses bringing the world about. We became, guess what happened? When we first launched our satellite, now there I am, somebody said, oh Candace, you changed the color of your hair. I said, well, no, the color got changed. But, you know, here, this is a problem. I was the only woman. And here we all were. And behind me is the Grand Duke of Luxembourg. And behind him is Mr. Werner. We were launching our satellite, December 13th, 1988. What happened? 11 months later, the wall fell down. 30 years ago, November 9th, 1989, and we were the only ones who could cover, excuse me just a second, all of Europe. So we became number one, we became in the black in our very first year. And you know, it's one thing to become number one, it's another thing to stay number one. And so, Maria, we went global. I told everybody, I said, we have to go global. And today, the SES Astra satellite system is the world's largest and most profitable satellite system. I can say all of this because I did not take any money from doing Astra. My husband was the ambassador of Luxembourg. The government of Luxembourg was giving the frequencies, and it was the right thing that I not have any reward financially. You know, and you talk about what you can do in life with satellites. So you can also create mobile satellite communications with Iridium. We had business satellite telecommunications so that we could join Czech Republic and France together in a satellite network. We did the first private launcher between Russia and the United States to launch our European Astra satellite in 1995, so 20 years ago. So space has been bringing about international peace, freedom of choice, and universal access of telecommunications, of television, and by the way, also of internet, because that is now, you know, in 1994, I created Europe Online, the world's first internet broadband satellite service. So, you know, that's all history, to be honest. And now, what is the most important challenge that we are facing today? The most important challenge is our environment. It is the Earth, and it is our space environment as well. And just as, you know, 35 years ago, I said, okay, we have to bring about freedom of choice and universal access, I'm saying now space can bring about helping us solve. And thank you very much, lady from Mexico, for saying that women can bring about solutions and entrepreneurs can bring about solutions, because I do believe that space can do this. And we are also, through the miniaturization of components and Internet of Things, we're opening up an entire new industry. And when I look at Greece and I see that you have a minister for digital governance and that you are becoming a data-driven economy and a data-driven society, this is what space is driving, and you will be able to take part of it. So here, do you know that space can cover and can address every single sustainable development goal? And that's exciting. And you know, hey, we don't always have to be so serious. We can also have fun, and we should have fun in providing solutions to some of our most difficult challenges. So the satellite development, the sustainable development goals, the planetary boundaries, okay, we're talking about space, so that's kind of cool. And let us not forget about business. So Wilbur Ross says that it will become a 1 trillion industry space. In 2040 to 2050, we're looking at it becoming a $1.1 to $2.4 trillion industry. This is just the United States. This is not the world. So there is a huge opportunity for new entrepreneurs, for new businesses to take advantage, to save the world, and to make money. And I'd quote Raymond Barr, who said, you know, about 10 years ago, right before, unfortunately, he died, you know, he told me, he said, 20 years ago, 80% of the jobs did not exist that exist today, and I assure you, the more is going to be happening in the future. So I think I would like to now just show, if I may, the videos. I have 2 very short videos about how the space is looking at measuring the climate change. And as Peter Drucker said, if you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So you must be able to measure. So if you would be so kind as to show the first video, please, David. So this was in 1890. We were seeing still a world that was not too hot. It was very cool. And then throughout the years with the Industrial Revolution, it got hotter and hotter. 1955, 1960. And we are now entering, you can literally see how the Earth from the satellites, from sky, is getting hotter and hotter. And this is terrible. The second video, if you would be so kind, just shows a little bit how the CO2 emissions are also affecting our world. If you can show the second video, David. So this is just an 18-second video to show just in 1 year how the carbon dioxide is coming more and more into the atmosphere and giving us problems. So I love this picture, because if you remember, I showed you the picture where there was only one person, one woman in the launch party of my first satellite, SES. Well, you know what? 5 years ago, a number of us got together, and we decided that we were going to bring high throughput internet to the Pacific Islands. And it's called Oceania Women's Network Satellite. So only women are allowed, no men are allowed. Our investment, by the way, has quintupled. We received the Better Satellite World Award in London this last December. And we are bringing to all of those islands focused beams of high throughput broadband internet. And we are helping education, government, hospitals, and also because of the climate change, so many of these islands will go away, and so we are giving them notice before they will disappear and saving lives. So Another problem that we are having is with everybody hears about it, space debris. Space debris, because we are using more and more satellites. It's just like with the cars on the roads. At first, there were no traffic instructions because there were not that many cars. But now we are increasingly getting more satellites, and so we need to have space governance. And this is where I hope that the ICC, I'm already working with them, and Greece, that we will be able, you who are the mother of democracy, that we will be able to put some space governance. Do you know that the space governance has not been changed since 1967 at the United Nations? So this is a problem. And then, you know, if we're talking about business, well, we're looking at $11.6 billion worth of new business that will, for instance, be giving us more precision agriculture using satellites. Or we are looking at talking about oil spills that we will be able to save. We are looking at protecting our forests. This is a $183 million business. All of these businesses are new businesses that new generations of entrepreneurs can go to. You here in Greece, you've played such an important role in water supply and quality. Same thing. We are talking here about protecting the water and the oceans that are so key to our life on planet. And, you know, this is going to be, I mean, because of the miniaturization of components, because of the democratization. When I used to talk about universal access, I was talking at first about universal access to telecommunications and to television. Now I am talking about universal access to space. Young kids can do their own rockets. They can do their own satellites, and they should, because they're going to learn how to make great businesses. And, you know, we all have to learn how to code. And one of the things I'm working with is Raspberry Pi, bringing it to Syria, bringing it to Kenya, teaching kids how to learn how to code. And of course, now, Paul, I know you're not into going to the Mars and to Pluto, but actually it is from those places that we will learn more about the Earth, how to save the Earth, how to develop technologies, such as we did when we went to the moon. And of course, I'm working on a project right now where we're looking to bring an all-female space crew to the International Space Station with SpaceX's president, Gwynne Shotwell. So, very quickly, trends in new space, that's what they call it. You know, and new space is considered to be commercially oriented space and privately financed space. I've always done that. I've never ever worked with a government or for a government. I've always been an entrepreneur, always started the companies, got them launched. But, you know, some of the things, so democratization, privately financed, satellite constellations, we're having Iridium, we're having OneWeb, we're having Blue Origin, Starlink. We'll have a lot of satellites, but we will have a traffic system that knows how to navigate and to make certain that they do not have collisions. IoT, Internet of Things. Beforehand, people used to be connected to computers. Now things are connected to computers. Everything has a sensor on it, and we need to collect that data, and the only way that we can really do it quickly is via satellites. And more countries, such as Greece, are having their own space agencies, or they are putting them into digital agendas. So I believe that Greece has an amazing opportunity, and I'm so happy that my friend Christina has come back from ASA, where she was the right-hand woman to the Director General, to help Greece go along this path. You are becoming a data-driven economy and a society, and space is basically providing all of this big data for this data-driven economy. So it's very, very important, and then this will be analyzed via artificial intelligence, etc. You, Greece, you started perhaps the first merchant marines. Well, now you can become the merchants of peace, just like for the ICC, on land, on sea, in the air, and in space. Your heritage in shipping. When Nikos came to a symposium that I was doing, and he said, Candace, it's not from the ground up, it's from the space down. And I said, yes. And he said, that is Greece. That is everything that we are doing. And then, you know, as access to space becomes more democratic, Greece, the home of democracy, and of course you're having the Athens Democracy Forum, and you will be very important, Greece, in helping make certain that we have laws and principles going forward for this new golden era of space. I'm going to turn to my wonderful colleague and friend, Christina, and thank you all so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Christina Giannopapa. I'm advisor to the Secretary General of Telecommunications and Post. It is a great pleasure to be here today. Unfortunately, our Secretary General, Mr. Zorzakakis, who was supposed to be here today, we have heard the Minister Georgiades, the government is working very hard on achieving the targets it has set, and thus he was not able, unfortunately, to be here today. So I will give the presentation on his behalf and participate to any discussions that are going to be taking place here today. And it's a great pleasure and honor to be sitting next to Candace, who I know for quite some time, and she's a very inspiring person for me as a woman, being of a little bit younger generation. So. Space. We have heard already from Candace that space is actually everywhere. It's part of our everyday life, and it is indispensable part of what we do and into the digitization. Just a little bit of images of what space is and how we look at it from a higher place, looking down on Earth, seeing a little bit of what also Candace said with different types of data, satellite information, connectivity, looking into the climate change, water resources, technologies that are developing overall. So, is Greece a newcomer into the space activities? Actually, it is not. Greece is one of the founding members of the International Telecommunications Union since 1865, and it has been engaging into various international and European organizations that are engaging in space activities. In particular, it has been part of EUMETSAT, which is the meteorological organization giving information regarding weather. It is part of the European Space Agency. It started engaging with the European Space Agency in 1994 and became a full member in 2005. It is part of the United Nations Committee of Outer Space Affairs, which they discuss a lot of issues related to space, about the environment around, about the registration of the objects, and ensuring that everyone will have a future in space as well later on. And it also is part of being a member of the EU in a number of European organizations like the SATSAN, the GSA, which is one of the latest agencies of the European Union, which is becoming bigger, and it is engaging into the exploitation of Galileo, which is the European GPS, and to EUMETSAT, which provides images from space. Now, in terms of the Greek ecosystem, Greece, over the past years, has been developing its ecosystem, and it is quite vibrant and has 45 SMEs. It has an annual growth of 7%, and it brings together also universities, research institutes, and companies and institutions. Greece also has a satellite operator, which is Elasat. It is in its territory, and over the years is trying to develop and foster it more, and we have been engaging over the past years into a number of initiatives that will help the area grow even further. Let's look at some of the initiatives that are currently have been developed. One of the things that Greece has done in 2017, it actually set up its own space law in order to ensure that entrepreneurs who would like to come to Greece and to set up their businesses, they have the possibility of knowing how to do that, and additionally to engage into registration of objects, of space objects, which is one of the obligations according to the United Nations treaties. It has its own governmental satellite-owned network. It is one of the very few European countries that has that. The others are, there are another 7 of them that have this system. It is only operational since a couple of months. Basically, the government and the ministers have the possibility to communicate with each other through satellite communications, which is there in case of a disaster. So if there would be an earthquake, for example, and the terrestrial networks will be congested and they will be down, they will still have the possibility to communicate with each other through the satellite telephones and the satellite network. So space doesn't have any borders, so it's operational from everywhere. The other part that the government is engaging in is setting up a business incubation center. Lots of technologies which are actually developed originally for space can be used in terrestrial activities, because space is a remote and harsh environment. You cannot go up there and then if it breaks down, you go and you fix it. So the technologies are pushed to the edge. So a lot of technologies can be transferred for space and they can be marketable on the ground. And the government is setting up a business incubation center in order to help entrepreneurs bring space back to Earth from a technology perspective. Another part which Greece is leading and is engaging in an initiative is space and maritime. As we heard, we are a shipping nation, and the perspective that space has for shipping is very, very large. It has the perspective of transforming completely the space sector into a new generation, with combining information from satellite, air, and sensors which might be on board ships. It can help a lot in logistics. And thus, Greece wants to foster and facilitate the further development of the sector. Additionally, our minister has also mentioned that there is a space national program for microsatellites, and I will say a little bit more about this because microsats, as also Candice showed, it's something that you can ride the new wave. You can get into the new space activities, and it's more accessible. So, space is part of different type of solutions. It can combine data from space, air, and ground, bringing it into what is called big data, and this, if it is assessed, it becomes information. And when it comes to information, you can help politicians make informed decisions, you can help businesses make business out of this type of information, selling it to the broader public, and thus, it can help in lots of different areas. It is a horizontal tool that can be used for agriculture, with precision farming, in disaster management. It can help into the sustainable development goals in terms of helping, for example, in the case of Africa, to see where the water is and how it is moving. Of course, it can help in all types of and sorts of logistics for transportation. And one has to see it in a more holistic way in the digital era, as it is part of the solution, and not necessarily the end user might need to know that it is about space, but wants to have the solution there. So what lies ahead? We are having a new era of space activities. In the past, space was about astronomy. Space was about the competition between the US and Russia with Sputnik and landing on the moon. Afterwards, it was about the international cooperation with the International Space Station and lots of different activities taking place. Now we're in a new era. We have the democratization of space, where not only Space is accessible to very few governments, but it is accessible to entrepreneurs, to commercialization. And the role of the governments and the agencies and all the actors engaging is to facilitate them further growing and making their targets. So the different type of technologies related to Industry 4.0, they relate also to Space 4.0, and they transform the sector. They make the accessibility at lower cost. You don't necessarily need to develop develop components only. You can buy components off the shelf and then build and engage into new technologies for space. And Greece is planning to ride the wave of new space for the future with lots of different types of activities, as I mentioned before. I will mention again in particular the Business Incubation Center to ensure there is technology transfer from space to Earth and back, and also to foster small, medium-sized enterprises, and at the same time to build capacities through our national microsatellite program, which will give us the possibility to look into the future and engage further into various activities. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Candace.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions?
Any issues with pollution in space from the thousands? Any issue about the pollution in space from the thousands of small and big satellites?
Yes.
Which will make it dangerous to travel through space.
Yes.
You may be hit by one of them. But you know, what kind of velocities do they have?
Yeah, so actually, I did talk about this when I talked about the space debris. The biggest problem at the moment is that there is no system existing today that really with precision says which object could eventually collide with another object. We are working, as Christina has said, there are now radar, land-based systems, and I'm actually the vice chair of a company called North Star, where we are doing a space-based system which will track all objects in space. Today we can see about 30,000 objects in space. We know that there are 600,000 objects in space. So this is something for quantum computing, it's for AI, and it's for gathering the data. But with this system, today, with an imperfect system, we are sending about 3 million alerts a year to companies, say, move your satellite, do this. With this system, we should have 100,000 precision alerts to say there may be a problem, you should move. So this is happening right now, and it absolutely needs to be an international an international cooperation, and that is actually also why I have reached out to the ICC to help us with the ITU, etc., put in some new rules of governance for this particular thing. Yes, Tari.
When they say that you have geostationary orbit, what does that mean? And the ITU apparently allots each country 2 slots or something.
Okay, so
and it's valid. There's some kind of time period by which you have to use that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Tari, you're a pro.
No, I mean,
Okay, so today we have a geostationary orbit. So the satellites have an orbital position, and it orbits literally with the Earth. And these are 36,000 kilometers above us. And that is basically also, my first satellites were with Astra. They were all geostationary. We then actually have LEOs, so low Earth orbit satellites. Those are companies like Iridium. And increasingly, all of the new satellite systems are going into a low Earth orbit. And the reason for this is because today, those low Earth orbit satellites, which are smaller, they're able to be more performant
And it, gravity, right? So just imagine sending something up 36,000 kilometers is a lot more expensive than sending something up to 200 kilometers. So it's much, much cheaper. And so we are seeing now all of these new countries, new companies coming using the low Earth orbit. And this is the future. This is absolutely the future of satellites. But we don't need to worry about it because we will be having tools which will help us give signposts and stoplights in space. And just think, in the United States, the Secretary of Commerce has now taken over space from the Department of Defense because they are realizing that space is a new platform for commerce. Monsieur, yes.
No. As I understand, having so many satellites in space accumulated all through all these years, are there any programs for, and I understand, if I understand correctly, there is a finite life for a satellite, yes? Are there any programs for refueling, let's say, satellites?
Yes.
And technically upgrading the equipment that they bear?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is, this is a fascinating field. It's called in-orbit servicing. And it is quite new. It's really kind of come to the fore about a year, 2 years ago. And particularly for the geo-stationary satellites, which are very expensive. If you spent, $300, $400 million for the launch, for the insurance, for the satellite, getting it up there, you want that asset. This is an asset. You want it to continue. So today we're talking about 10, 15 years, but most of the components on that satellite are still fine. So one is refueling, and if you can refuel it, even if you can get it for 5 more years, just think of the economics, it's great. Also in terms of repairing and all of this. So this is very, very interesting. At the same time, you have what we're calling living infrastructure, and that is because those low Earth orbit satellites, the little ones, are so cheap to send up because the rockets, are cheap. You have rocket labs from New Zealand, you have SpaceX, we're talking now, we used to talk about $100,000 per kilo. We're now talking less than $1,000 per kilo to send up a satellite. And so what we are seeing is companies saying, we don't want these satellites to continue up there because they will be with outdated components. And so we're saying 5 to 8 years, and we'll just launch new satellites. Now, what we will then do, all of these new satellites are all having capacity to be burned up when they come, so they're deorbited. So, it is very clear that we are entering into this new era of space. Yeah. Okay, one last question, because I think we only don't have any more time, but yeah. Oh, we have time? Oh, okay, okay, okay. So micro?
Candace, give us some examples from your own experience about entrepreneurship and space industry. And of course, then very happy to hear that an incubator is going to be established in Greece. Then for Christina, we're very pleased to hear about your plans. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll talk and then I'll let Christina. So, when I was 30, I had hair down to here, and I was going around Europe, and I was telling all of these, European industrial manufacturers that that Luxembourg, was going to have a private satellite company. And I'll never forget, Dr. Schwartz, the CEO of MBB, today Airbus, saying, oh, Ms. Johnson, we don't sell satellites to private companies from Luxembourg. We only sell satellites to established governments, such as Germany. Well, you know, in the meantime, the company that I started became the largest, buyer of satellites. So he had to pretty much eat crow. So today, entrepreneurs they can get into space because the barrier entry is so low. And they also, and this is the beautiful thing about the ESA BICs, is that they don't have any legacy. So they just say, I'm going to send up a mobile phone in a little satellite and see what happens. That's what happened with Planet. But Christina, yes.
So basically, the business incubation centers in Greece is going to be done in cooperation with the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency has set up a very elaborate model that it is using in all different countries as a business incubation center. It goes there, it partners with a local partner, and from that, lots of different small companies, they can come, they have access to the different technologies that the European Space Agency has been developing, and they might have ideas on how to bring them into the market in terms of doing technology transfer. They are, so for example, if we take solar panels, they have been developed originally for space and they're widely used on Earth. So there are tons of different type of examples of such technology transfers that are accessible for the market widely. So they will foster and help these entrepreneurs get access to the technologies. Also, it could be the other way around, that some entrepreneurs might have an idea that comes from a terrestrial area and they want to bring it into space. And this also will be fostered through these business incubation centers.
And I have to say, I'm also the chairman of the largest space venture fund in the world, and I would say 80% of the companies that we have invested in have come through these ESA big ventures. So we're a private fund, but we have invested in 80% of our portfolio is coming from ESA.
And we hope you will be also investing in the Greek ESA big.
Of course. All right. Oh, one more question. Yes.
I wanted to ask you if there are any plans to recover the space debris that you mentioned.
Yes, there are. So it's here again. I mean, this is fun. This is rocket science, and it is really fun. And by the way, I have 5 degrees of music. Okay, so I grew up in space. But so one of the companies that we have invested in, and which was also from the ESA BIC incubators, a company called D-Orbit. And so what they are doing is they are doing a launch rocket that has, and so it's being launched on another launcher. So and then it goes into its own orbit, and it has, let's say, space for about 20 satellites. So it goes around to each of the places in the orbit, and it leaves off the new satellite. And then at the same time, since it has a slot free, it picks up the ones that need to be done. So, so now this is not for all satellites, because it's probably cheaper at that moment. So many of them are not. They're not expensive anymore. So this is something, but because we're getting paid for going and delivering, it's basically a free ride. So it is good, yeah. And there are some other things as well, yeah. Okay, so I think Christina and I would like to thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
thank you, Candace. Really, I feel proud, really proud. Please have a look on your program. in the back of your badge. We are just in time. In fact, Candace, you finished 3 minutes earlier. Just to let you know that I invite you all, after the keynote farewell address of our Minister of Defense, who is on his way walking to Zapion. Foreign Affairs, thank you. To join us in front of the Zapion Hall for a group photo. What will remain from this great day is the group photo. And especially, it will be a great honor if Professor is going to stay with us for this great photo, which will be in the center of the International Chamber of Commerce site for the next centenary. Now, the only persons I cannot control are the politicians. But we did well, thanks to Petros Doukas, who is a former politician. So, I'm here to reply to your questions in order to gain a couple of minutes until Minister Dendias arrives. Is any question about ICC, especially for our foreign friends, about Greece's today situation, politically, social? As someone said, we are definitely having, especially in the summer months, a good time. You can see it. God is a friend of Greece. We had the best weather today. Maybe the mayor of Sparta can tell us a few things about his ambition for your city. I'm sure you're going to find something.
We have quite a few ambitious events being planned, to which you're, of course, all invited. One of which I'm sure you will all want to participate, is a 7-marathon run from Sparta to Thermopylae, direct, non-stop, 340 kilometers. And I'm sure a lot of you will be signing up today to do it with no stop. But because we know that not everybody can do that, we will also have a relay, skitallodromia, between Sparta and Thermopylae, so you can gather 100 friends of yours and do 3 kilometers per person, 3.3 kilometers per person. We also,
Not just now. May I ask you to go and welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece? Go and welcome him. We have to congratulate him because he's really in time. No, yeah, yes. Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is just in time. I want to congratulate you for being, for being just in time. I just want to let know. No problem. Because you are going. Greek after all. Yes, you are Greek. We are going to make a group photo at the end. We are going to make a group. So what I want you all to know is that the Dendias family is a traditional Chamber of Commerce family. His father was for many, many years the president of the Chamber of Commerce of the island of Corfu, where I'm enjoying part of my summer after Sifnos. So,
and you have a magnificent house.
Thank you. So you are welcome.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to address this meeting on the occasion of the centenary celebration of the establishment of the International Chamber of Commerce. Through its century-old presence, the International Chamber of Commerce has actively promoted trade and responsible business conduct, while its global approach to regulation is an asset for global economic diplomacy. The eagerness of the Greek traders, businessmen, and industrialists to actively participate in the creation of a new global open economic environment was reflected by the establishment of the National Hellenic Commission of the International Chamber of Commerce as early as the first quarter of the 20th century. Today, International Chamber of Commerce, Hellas, representing the 59 chambers of commerce, industry, crafts and professionals of the country, as well as natural and legal persons, reaffirms Greece's commitment in shaping the rules of conducting business worldwide. Economic diplomacy is well recognized nowadays as one of the main pillars of modern diplomacy. This is happening within the reality of an ever-changing and competitive international economic environment. The Greek government has already set economic diplomacy and market openness as a central priority of its policy agenda. We have appointed in the Foreign Ministry a Deputy Minister of Economic Diplomacy and Openness. We have united the once scattered administration units under the wing of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have put in effect a new framework that offers a comprehensive, holistic, and coordinated national economic openness policy. Greek diplomacy is using the above economic approach as a driving force. It aims to enhance the openness of the outward-looking Greek enterprises. It aims to support their international competitiveness, exploit the comparative advantages of the Greek economy, and finally, which is of the essence, to increase exports. We aim to attract foreign investments in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, we are situated in the center of the 340 million people market. We're a country of excellent and challenging business opportunities for Greek enterprises and foreign investments. We can serve as a gateway to the Balkans, the Black Sea, and the Caspian region. We can also serve as a gateway to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, the Arabic world, let alone the countries of the European Union. Today's event finds us dealing with challenges and revive uncertainties of the global economic environment. In this regard, the ongoing debate of shaping a new future for the Bretton Woods institution and the World Trade Organization is very relevant. Greece, as a founding member of the Bretton Woods organizations, that is the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, firmly supports the realization of their causes even when faced with internal adversities. Since 1945, Greece has actively participated in all initiatives undertaken by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. We have provided our contribution to the various domains. Back in 1944, Bretton Woods Conference, Greece recognized the importance of the then stillborn International Trade Organization. This was later praised by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. These post-war economic structures were called to adapt to a new evolving global reality, which occurred at the turn of the previous century. Analysts quote tectonic changes, like the rise of new emerging economies such as China, India, and Brazil. They mention firstly the unattainable, the acceleration of progress of the industrial economies, which made the distinction between the West and the rest less apparent. A key factor not to be ignored, as it became evident also from today's discussion, is the evolution of technology and the digitalization of the economy. New technologies have already entered in the economy, transforming market structures and creating new possibilities for trade and investment. The global economy, that you already know, is being rapidly digitized. Information and communications are no longer confined to a specific sector. They constitute the foundation of all modern, innovative economic systems. The powerful combination of flexible, high-speed 5G networks, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and big data refer all together as intelligent connectivity, are going hand in hand with the future of global navigation satellite system, creating a strong interconnection between new digital economy and space. The European Union is aiming at a common strategy for a single digital economy. Greece participates in this discussion through the Hellenic Space Center, member of the European Space Agency. The Hellenic Space Center will contribute to the development and enhancement of technology and space applications. Furthermore, it will serve as a manager for national programs and projects in areas of space. Moreover, the advancement of space technology would offer added value to Greece in the fields of reinforcement of security, search and rescue, and border management, which affects us greatly now because of migration. It will amplify the crisis management capacity in dealing also with earthquakes, wildfires, etc. Protectionism has always been a challenge to the global economic architecture. Trade barriers, in their tariff or non-tariff form, hinder tremendously the effort to reshape the world trade system in favor of all of us. The European Union, and by extension Greece, supports the free access of goods in foreign markets. We consider that international trade is not a zero-sum game, but rather an opportunity for all of us to create a win-win situation. In order to be able to secure the benefits, today we have to address a number of challenges. Unfair competition, expressed in the various forms of trade barriers, the price fluctuations of natural resources, the market distortions in key areas of global trade, the rise of digital economy and intelligent connectivity, as well as the inability of multilateral rules to keep in pace with changes in the global economy in important areas, are the main issues to be discussed in order to regulate adverse reactions in the global economy. Greece is contributing to the creation of such a regulated, safe, and stable environment. We support our companies to export worldwide, and we appreciate that our trading partners follow the international trade rules. We encourage them to comply with all commitments, as our ambitions are clear in keeping such a firm stance in a region full of possibilities for economic growth. In light of the above, we believe that the rules of international trade should be reshaped in a more inclusive and in a more fair way for all, without deconstructing the international economic institutional architecture as such. As a conclusion, I would like to thank you for this most interesting discussion in a moment when changes are both necessary and critical. In this sense, public and private agents, as part of the global economic architecture, certainly the International Chamber of Commerce and International Chamber of Commerce Hellas are important assets for global economic diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, let us move forward with confidence. Thank you very much.